again, Sofia. CIFMERS Sean Gibbons. As some Global Head of Facility Management and Real Estate for Roche Diagnostics of the Schweizeria. And I'd like to talk to you today about how we're taking a data-driven approach to improving the performance of our office portfolio. So just a bit of background about Roche. It's a global pioneer in personalized healthcare. We have two divisions, diagnostics and pharmaceuticals. And this helps us in our quest to find new solutions for patients across the entire spectrum of healthcare. From prevention to diagnosis to treatment, as well as monitoring. Annual investment is in the region of 10 billion Swiss francs in research and development, and this drives a broad, deep understanding of molecular biology, as well as more recently data analytics. We have 30 research and development sites globally, and we have many partnerships with lots of other pharmaceutical companies as well as academic institutions. With 53 billion Swiss francs in sales, it makes us the largest biotechnology company with a strong focus on cancer, as well as driving in vitro diagnostic solutions across the portfolio. So the diagnostics division, we have more than 600 locations globally, and today I want to talk to you about how we're started to use a lot of this data that we've been collecting to help drive and improve the performance of our office portfolio. So the Global Real Estate and Facility Management function, this was established in 2010 when I joined Roche, with a clear mandate to operate as a centre for guidance, as a centre for best practice, as well as consultancy and governance as well, so decision making sits with us. And this ensures the delivery of productive, engaging places for people to work that are cost and space efficient, that are fully compliant, as well as a mandate for driving continuous improvement across the portfolio through the provision of things like tools and processes and knowledge sharing. So one of the first things I did was really to spend some time trying to understand the portfolio. And what struck me were several things. At a global level, we didn't really possess an overview of our portfolio. We didn't know whether we were spending above, below, or at market. And we certainly didn't know whether the leases were protecting us or protecting our landlords. We had an inconsistent approach to the way that we identified our needs and executed facilities and real estate projects. And the way we measured the performance of our portfolio was pretty rudimentary. The data quality was also very, very poor. So the other issue that I also saw as well, that our offices hadn't really changed much since, I guess, the early 1990s. So we weren't really reflecting the changing ways in which people work these days, and we weren't leveraging these big changes in technology that allow us to work in a much more flexible and agile way. So all of these issues were basically conspiring to leave us with a portfolio that at times was underutilized, and we were paying far more than we should do for it. So the focus for today is really how we've started addressing some of these topics by improving the quality of our data, by comparing the performance of our portfolio to the outside world. We want to understand where's best practice, and through establishing targets and then initiatives to actually bridge that gap from where we were to where we want to be. So Peter Drucker, again, that was mentioned earlier, obviously a popular guy today. He was often quoted as saying, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And this is equally as true for facilities and real estate as it is for any other sector. The problem we have with real estate is that we have multiple measurement standards that exist globally, all of which measure real estate in a slightly different way. Indeed, there was some research by Jones Lang LaSalle that said just looking at space alone across the main measurement standards, that difference can be up to 24%. So unless we could find a way of measuring our offices in a consistent, comparable way, then we would end up comparing what we say in the UK, apples with pears, and drawing entirely the wrong conclusions. At the time we wanted to start measuring, there was no such thing as the International Property Measurement Standards. And even today, the amount of data available measured under this standard and independently validated is, at least in my view, pretty limited. So we started looking at what was available, and we decided to adopt something called the Global Estate Measurement Code, or GEM code, produced at that time by a company called IPD. So through the use of the GEM code, we've really been able to start looking at getting a holistic view of our portfolio and its performance globally, and the ability to compare the performance of our portfolio across industries. And that's really important for us because pharma traditionally haven't been good at space efficiency. We're good at pharmaceuticals, but others are much better at offices than we are. So it's comparing with our peers, for example, in financial sector, in the IT sector, and in some cases even in the public sector. They represent to us best practice, and so whatever they're doing, we want to learn from that and actually adapt that and set targets and then track the progress over time. And by adopting this measurement code, this really gave us the opportunity to start doing that. So we set out to develop a balanced scorecard to really help determine how well our offices perform. And we do this by looking at three main pillars. So efficiency, this helps us to understand what can be done to optimize costs and optimize the use of our space. We look at how well our offices contribute to our environmental sustainability targets. And the final, most heavily weighted pillar of the scorecard is what we call effectiveness. And this is the user's perception of their workplace and how well it contributes to them performing their tasks in an optimal way. So we've been doing this now, we're now in the 5th year. We have quite a rich pool of data, 20 million data points around the world. We measure everything consistently, so whether we have an office in Shanghai or in Berlin or San Francisco, we measure it in the same way. That allows us to start comparing, and we can compare not only Roche against Roche, but also Roche against the outside world. And this has allowed us to start saying, okay, as I mentioned before, where's the best practice? Where do we want to be? How can we adopt targets and then adapt that for our own use and then start implementing that across the portfolio whenever we have new capital investment projects, refurbishments, relocations, and so on. So a report is produced for each building, and this provides detailed information on the performance of each pillar. So efficiency, this breaks down occupancy costs at a component level, and it compares each component cost against the rest of the Roche portfolio, as well as the external benchmark, as well as last year. So we get to start to see trends and understanding, are we moving in the right direction? Is there something that we need to focus on? Space efficiency, this addresses topics such as how much space per workstation is allocated, what is our desk sharing ratio, and what is the proportion of individual private offices that are allocated. And sustainability, this looks at how much energy and water we consume and how much waste we produce. So effectiveness, this is the interesting one, and this is, as I mentioned before, this is most heavily weighted. So this looks at more than 30 factors associated with office facilities and the environment. And users are asked not only how satisfied they are with each factor, but also how important each factor is in order for them to perform their task. Because if we only focus on satisfaction, then we could end up spending a lot of time, a lot of resource, a lot of money in trying to fix something that actually for the user doesn't need to be fixed because maybe it's just not important to them. So the collection of this data and comparing externally has really enabled us to start identifying opportunities and set targets across a number of key drivers of performance improvement, and these are just 6 of them here. So using space efficiently, this helps drive down occupancy costs. So we adopted a target of 12 square meters per workstations for all new investment projects across the portfolio. And this reflects the upper quartile of the external benchmark. So it's saying, where's best practice? We need to be somewhere around the upper quartile of that. Through identifying occupancy levels and reflecting the different ways that people work, we established a target, and it's a rather modest target of 10% desk sharing ratio. And again, by reflecting the changing needs of today's office worker, we want to encourage more open, more interactive, more collaborative spaces. And key to driving this was the over-reliance on enclosed private office space. So again, looking at the external benchmark, looking at the upper quartile, we adopted a figure of 13%. And in keeping with our group sustainability objectives, we also targeted a 10% reduction in water and 15% in energy consumption. Now, all of these efficiency gains potentially come at a price, and that is the user acceptance, the whole user experience. So our target was also to ensure that whilst effecting these other improvements, the user perception should also improve so that ideally both importance and satisfaction remain in balance. So how well do we perform? As I say, we're now in the 5th year and we've got 4 years worth of data across this big portfolio. So the general trend is one of continuous improvement over the past 4 years, so that's good. Space efficiency has improved by 20% if we look at space per workstation, and this has basically avoided the need to rent or construct more than 90,000 square meters of office space. So that's the equivalent of this mall and a little bit more, just by adopting more stringent space targets. The proportion of private offices in use has also decreased by 20%, and we've seen a slight improvement in desk share ratio, but we're still way off where we want to be. And our user perception index has actually improved as well, which is quite interesting when we note the improvements in space efficiency. You know, you would think intuitively by squeezing people into a smaller space, taking away their private office, that people are going to get a little bit unhappy. But if you manage it as part of a proper workplace program, then the data shows us that this is actually possible. So if we focus just on user perception, we can see how this has evolved over a 4-year period. So in 2014, here we see the global delta between satisfaction and importance. And at that time, around about 3/4 of the factors that we measured, the users were telling us, you're under-delivering them. So our IT systems were consistently underperforming. Many aspects of the working spaces on offer were also unsuitable for the needs of our users. And they were concerned about the quality of facility services as well as the repair and maintenance regime that we had in place. So if we look at the 2017 data, we can see there's been some changes. Now we see that 3/4 of the factors are actually within an acceptable delta, and the remaining delta between the other factors has narrowed. So this demonstrates we're now starting to see the impact of our target approach and the associated initiatives to actually drive through these changes. Noise disturbance, air quality, temperature, they've improved relative to perceptions in 2014, but they remain persistent problems. So why is that? Well, I think it's probably because it's very personal. You know, what might be the right temperature for me might be too cold sat to someone next to me, and might be too warm for someone else sat the other side of the office. And it's the same thing with noise disturbance. And that's really interesting because we sliced the data. We looked at old buildings, we looked at new buildings, we looked at buildings that were predominantly open plan, buildings that were predominantly enclosed. Those three factors always in the top 5 of issues that people reported. Workplaces, generally, they've started improving to meet the needs of our users, and the provision of facility services has also started to get better. So we seem to be on the right track. If we broaden the view back out and look at several key metrics on a regional basis, we start to understand a little bit more of the details. So here we have the regions North America, Latin America, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Asia Pacific. And the little triangles next to the metric says, has it got better or improved by 10% or more during the past 3 years? Has it got worse by 10% or more, or has it stayed the same? So we're improving in the area of sustainability, and I think improvements have really been driven by the focus on energy conservation across the portfolio, introducing new technology, introducing new behavior protocols, and targeting more environmentally sustainable buildings whenever the opportunities take place. Space efficiency, this is improved by 10% or more across all the regions, although we see it's Latin America and Asia Pacific that are closest to our targets. And user perception. In 3 of the 4 regions, we see that the users are generally happier, more engaged with their workplaces, as I said before, despite we're taking space and we're taking private offices away from them. So where do we need to focus on for improvement? Well, sustainability. Energy usage remains high in North America. And I think this is probably partly due to the locations we're in, where energy is cheap. And that needs to be addressed over the next couple of years. Space, again, lots of opportunity exists to optimize in many locations, and what we do see is our desk share ratio hasn't really shifted in the past few years. What are the reasons for that? Well, we think it could be that headcount forecasts are not actually being achieved. So potentially over the next 3 or 4 years, as local businesses grow into their space, we would expect to see this figure rising. And we still got an issue in Latin America when it comes to user perception. So that's something that we need to look at to address. So how do we drive improvements? Well, we touched on before about the topic of setting targets, but that alone is not enough. One of the other areas that we're really focusing on is technology, and an example of that would be sort of real-time monitoring of space usage through our Wi-Fi systems, so that we can better match supply with demand, which has never been the case in the past. We're also looking at introducing more agile working programs. So again, whenever the opportunity exists, we're rolling that out across the portfolio. What else? Supply consolidation, so shifting more to an integrated model, or in some cases a bundled model, depending on the maturity of the local market. That's also something that's on the agenda, and we expect to see economies of scale, cost reduction, and new innovations in the way that services are performed. And life cycle asset management across our owned portfolio. That's really important for us. In the past, we've just done repairs and maintenance kind of when we think it's the appropriate time. We need to become better at that. We need to have a proper planned approach to doing that, as well as our capital renewal program. And knowledge sharing. It's all very well having these initiatives, but unless you have the people in place to deliver it, then it's going to be a challenge. So I've given a brief overview of the journey that we've made over the past few years, and we've made some relatively important steps to addressing these issues that I identified 8 years ago. But if we want to continue to move from these type of workplaces and create high-performing working environments, there's still a lot of work that we need to do. We need to become more strategic in our real estate decision-making by understanding what is the direction that the business is going in, what are the lease liabilities that we have, but also exploiting market opportunities, not just waiting for an option on a lease to come up, but looking at fluctuations in the market, engaging when the landlord, with the landlord when there's a dip in the market to perhaps re-gear a lease, and we've done that on several occasions recently. And we need to provide the appropriate resources to match the demand of the business. So where that expertise is needed in a certain country or a certain geography, we have an obligation to start providing that for them. And we want to continue to create more productive, more engaging places for our people to work, so the user perception increases. At the same time, our efficiency also improves. And we have to do this by ensuring that users' needs, users' working styles, they're all incorporated into workplace design, because the office can actually be a major contributor to making our company a great place to work. So, thank you for your time and attention. I've now reached the end of my presentation. Hopefully that was pretty much in time, Luciana.
Yeah. We don't know about this, but it's very nice. Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much. Please come in.